Marriage is not easy.
Fucking asshole!
Oh, God. I will always fight for you.
Don't give up on me.
Let's talk about it, I guess. Hey, it's Patsy. Welcome to the channel. I'm happy to have you here. If you're a subscriber, you're probably thinking this is like new for my channel. I usually have been posting a lot of like lifestyle and just vlog content, but let's be real. No one's watching that shit. And it's not just me. It's just like if you're not a famous person or if you don't have like an online following, no one's really going to be clicking on vlogs. And I watch a lot of commentary videos, so I wanted to give it a try. But enough about me, enough of the chit-chatting. You guys are here for the drama. So let's get into it. Today we're talking about season 5 of Love is Blind. If you're new to the show, if you've never seen it before, the whole premise is pretty much couples are in the pods, what they call the pods, and they're blind dating. And the whole goal is to leave the pods engaged. So that's right. This whole time that these people are in the pods, they don't see the person that they're dating. Hence why the title is called Love is Blind. I'm not really sure how long they're in the pods for. I want to say like maybe a week and a half. But the goal is by the end of that time, you have a partner and you hope that so for example, I'm talking about the woman's perspective. You're hoping that the guy that you like proposes to you so that you can leave the pods together. So to me, that kind of just sounds like a clusterfuck waiting to happen, but let's talk about it. So let me know if you guys want me to talk about the rest of the season, but let's get started with episode 1. So of course, episode 1 is the typical hoorah, let's get you guys excited. What do you guys hate about real life dating? What are you guys excited about dating in the pods? Blah, 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 all that fun stuff. We're introduced to the first person potentially getting out of the pods, Lydia. She's 30 years old and she talks about how in her previous relationship, she's always been called too much. She feels like she's never met a man who's like emotionally mature enough. So she's hoping to find that in the pods. They immediately start hitting it off since Lydia is a geologist and Milton works as an engineer in the same field, I guess. He works with like oil and gas. So they start bonding over metamorphic rocks and shit. And she's like, oh my God, Milton, you're so nerdy, but I love it. Blah, 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 blah. You know, all that good stuff. So it's going good. But then Milton tells her that he's 24. And she's like, oh, I don't know. You're younger than my brother, which honestly, if I was Milton, I wouldn't be interested after that. That's kind of weird. I wouldn't feel okay with that. But Milton's just telling her like, no, it's more about the mindset. Age is just a number. You shouldn't let that get in the way of us getting to know each other, whatever. So Lydia leaves that date like, I'm not sure about the age gap, but the geology is hot. Next is Lydia's next date with Izzy, who is 29 years old, and they start bonding as well. They start bonding over being Hispanic. He says that he's Mexican, she's Puerto Rican, so they bond over that, talk about family and stuff. So from that date, Lydia is also feeling Izzy. Then from here, we're introduced to Izzy. We hear a little bit more about his story. He tells us that he's been single for 2 years and his biggest insecurity is being bald. He talks about having experience dating on the apps and how he's been judged for his appearance. And he talks about how this one girl came in to meet him, saw that he was bald, said ill, and then walked out. I don't really know how true that is because if it's on a dating app, then she can clearly see that you're bald. But I don't know, maybe he used pictures when he still had hair. But yeah, anyway, he has always felt pretty insecure because he's bald and he doesn't want to be judged for that. But in the pods, we see that he immediately hits it off with Lydia. He hits it off with another girl named Stacy, and they bond over sports and family and shit like that. And he also bonds with a girl named Johnny. During his date with Johnny, he mentions he's 29 and she's 30. And she mentions that she'll be 31 within the next month. So she hopes that's not a deal breaker. And he says, no, I do like older women because they seem to be a little bit mentally stable. And she's like, oh, I like to consider myself as really stable. I'm pretty mentally stable, but I've always just went ahead and picked the wrong guy. So they both bond over, you know, wanting something more secure, something more serious. And that's how their date ends. Following this, we're introduced to Johnny. We hear a little bit more about her story. And she tells us how she's had a pattern of picking the wrong guys, like how she was opening up to Izzy. She says that she knows that she's ready to find love because she's never had the love that she felt like she deserved. And she's been feeling pretty discouraged because her mom told her, you know, since you can't seem to pick the right guy, maybe you're just not meant for love, which really hurts Johnny. So she's here to pretty much prove her mom wrong and to prove to herself that she is worthy of love. After her introduction, we go to her next date with a man named Chris, and their date goes pretty good. They start bonding over dogs. She has a beagle. He fosters dogs. And she starts to open up to him about how she always feels like she's choosing the wrong guys. Chris feels really optimistic when talking to Johnny. He just feels like their connection is supernatural. So it's clear that Chris is really into Johnny, and Johnny seems really into Chris as well. So that's where things leave off with them. And then the last two couples we're introduced to are Taylor and JP, and Uche and Aaliyah. Taylor and JP are pretty cute. They're like the little like country bumpkin couple, I guess. I don't know. That's how Taylor describes like her dream man. She's 25 years old. She's a kindergarten teacher, and she's like, I just want my man. She talks about like pretty much like a cowboy, which I guess JP encompasses. He's a firefighter. I forget how old he is. I think he's 30. But funny enough, Taylor is a kindergarten teacher at the school that he used to go to. So, of course, they start clicking over that. And the rest of their date goes pretty good, too. And with Uche and Aaliyah is 28, I believe, and Uche is 29. So they just start clicking from the start. They're feeling each other. They talk about how they want a partner that can help them grow and whatever. So that's where things leave off in their date. So those are all of our couples for this season. And now that we're introduced to them, now we're moving on to the rest of their dates. The next date, which is Izzy and Stacy, and they start to bond a little bit more. Their connection is still a little bit lighthearted. Like Stacy's talking about like how she can guess men's shoe sizes and shit. And he's like, oh, you seem like the girl that like is a lot of fun when we go out. Like I need that. I like that. So they're starting to feel each other a little bit more. Then we move on to Johnny and Chris's next date. They're playing a card game, and Chris pulls out a card and he says, if you could change the way you lost your virginity, would you? And she answers, she says, I lost mine my junior year of high school. I don't think I'd really change anything. Would you? And this is clear what we see, that Chris is like a little uncomfortable, and she, feels this hesitancy, and she's like, you don't have to tell me if you don't want to. And he says, since the experiment is all about, being open, being vulnerable, he decides to tell her his story. Chris mentions how he's always told people that he lost his virginity his junior year of high school, which did happen, but he was actually raped. He talks about how he took a trip to Mexico with a friend, and they were drinking at his suite, and she pretty much forced himself onto him, and I think you know what happens next. From this, Johnny is starting to feel, touched that Chris even felt comfortable enough to open up to Johnny. So because of that, she is supportive, and she's starting to feel a little bit closer to Chris. Moving on, we see Izzy's next date with Lydia, and Lydia is still super gushy over Izzy. I think because Milton told her that he was 24, she's like more attracted to Izzy than ever now, even though it's still day one. But she goes ahead and tells Izzy that he is her number one. This catches Izzy a little bit off guard because, as I mentioned, he's been hitting it off with Stacy and Johnny. So he tells her, I have other connections, but I just need time to like process all of this because it's just a lot, which I think is totally fair, especially if this is day one and you've been on all these dates. Like, he hasn't even had time alone to like think about his feelings and how he really feels about these girls. So I think that it was totally fair for him to say, but it's clear that Lydia is already being a little bit clingy, because when he tells her that, she's like, don't forget about me, which is like, girl, it's day one. That's a very real possibility. But nonetheless, that's how their date ends. Moving on to Uche and Aaliyah, they're still going pretty good. They start bonding over poetry and spoken word and how they used to perform and things like that. He tells her, oh, I should get, my poetry buddies together and see if we can like put something together so you can perform. She's really touched by that. Whatever. Their date ends off good. And then end of the night is Taylor and JP. Again, no drama with them. They're still going pretty good. She asks him if he likes pet names. He's like, no, not really. He's like, what about you? She's like, I really like Sugar Butt. He's like, Sugar Butt? Well, I guess you could be Sugar. Which is, pretty corny, but cute for them, I guess. Following this, we see Lydia's date with Izzy. She walks through the door. She's like, hola, mi amor. And this catches Izzy a little bit off guard. He's just looking like, oh, fuck. Like he didn't know Lydia was going to walk through the door. I don't know. So since he's sitting there silent, she's like, hello, are you okay? Hello, like you're not saying anything. He's like, oh yeah, like I'm here. And he just cuts to the chase. He tells her that he feels stronger to two other people. And obviously this makes Lydia a little frustrated. And she asks him, like, what's wrong? Like, what can I change? And of course, he's like taking time to think about it. And she's just being really impatient. She's just like, just tell me, just tell me. He ends up telling her that, you know, overall, it's just the chemistry, which again, I think it's totally fair. And he just tells her, like, there's nothing wrong with her per se. He just feels stronger with these other people. And Lydia takes this really hard. She just starts crying to him, and she's just saying how badly she craves to be loved and how she's never felt accepted for who she is. You know, I totally understand Lydia's feelings about, you know, feeling like she's never been loved for who she truly is. But girl, this is only day 1 or day 2. And this is your first connection to cut things off. There are other people in the pods, you know. I just feel like she shouldn't be so defeated. But I understand that, you know, I think it's clear that she's been through some trauma or something to make her feel like so, I don't know, unlovable or whatever. But this makes me feel a little sad for Lydia. But yeah, that's how their date ends. So the last date for episode 1 is Uche and Aaliyah. Throughout the episode, we haven't seen too much of them yet. As I mentioned, their connections have been pretty smooth, you know, just bonding, at least from what we've seen. So this date starts off just like any other, where they're gushing over each other. Aaliyah's telling Uche, you know, I really like you, but I'm nervous. I'm just not sure. And he's like, Aaliyah, you're my girl. We're going to walk out the pods together. Like, you have nothing to worry about. So from there, they start to talk about something a little bit more serious, and they talk about what each other's deal breakers are. Aaliyah then confides in Uche and tells him that she cheated on her ex in the past. They were together for 2.5 years, and this occurred maybe like 2 years ago, she says. Obviously, this catches Uche a little bit off guard, but she's very truthful. She doesn't really hold anything back, but Uche is like kind of grilling her, which I don't really know how to feel. After telling him that she was in this relationship 2 years prior, he's like, so you're a recent cheater, which, you know, rubs Aaliyah the wrong way. And I think that's a really poor way of looking at it. Like, okay, yeah, 2 years ago, not that long ago, but also is enough time for change to happen. I think especially in your late 20s, early 30s, I think like so much can change in that little bit of time. Yeah, 2 years is not a lot of time, but again, I just think your late 20s, your early 30s is like so transformative that like I feel like that's enough time for her to learn from her mistake. Long story short, she is obviously feeling a little nervous because Uche is, you know, taking this hard. And she's just like, you know, I don't want this to affect anything. And he's pretty much just like kind of accusing her, like, how do I know you won't be cheating again? And she's like, trust me, like, I've been through all of the guilt, the remorse of all that. Like, I don't think that's fair. Long story short, their conversation isn't really going anywhere. So she needs to take a break. And she's like, I understand that you feel differently about me now, so I'll leave. And from what we see, it looks like Uche is starting to talk, but she's still walking out the door. And again, I think this is just editing because I think she already walked out the door and then he started to speak up. I don't know. Because I feel like if he would have started talking, maybe she would have like at least just turned around to hear what he had to say. But I don't know. But yes, as she's walking out the door, he starts to say, you know, the fact that you even told me in the first place is a good thing. But by that point, she's out the door. And Uche is just left in the pods alone. The episode ends with Aaliyah crying. She goes back to the woman's living quarters and the girls are there consoling her. And Lydia comes up to her and she's being really supportive. She's just like, you know, this isn't anything about you. This is like Uche's loss, yada, yada, yada. But then she starts to talk like kind of specific. She's like, this just proves that Uche doesn't know what he wants and he should take accountability instead of blaming others. And it kind of seems like she's projecting because Izzy broke up with her that day, but I don't know. But I did just want to bring that up because I want you to keep that in mind for later. All right, moving on to episode 2. We start off with Lydia and Milton, and Lydia comes into the date a little bit low energy because Izzy just broke up with her the day before, and she's open about that. She tells Milton, you know, Izzy cut me off, and I'm feeling a little bit sad about that. And she opens up to him and she tells him the same thing, how she just feels like she's never been loved for who she is and how badly she craves to be loved. Milton reassures her and he tells her that he was actually thinking about her the day before and he was really hoping that they got to speak again. And this kind of helps Lydia perk up a little bit. But he tells her that she is his strongest connection, and this seems to calm down Lydia a little bit. So overall, it seems like their connection has some potential to grow. Next, we see Taylor and JP, and they continue to open up a little bit more. And we see JP get a little bit vulnerable. He talks about how his mom was a little bit abusive growing up, specifically towards his sisters, not really towards him. And growing up, since he was just a child, there wasn't much he could do to really intervene or help. So the most that he could do was just console his sisters and provide support. Taylor is really supportive with this. She's like, I know that you felt like you couldn't really do anything, but you are the best brother. You did as much as you could, pretty much. And this makes them feel a little bit closer. And Taylor just really appreciates JP being vulnerable with her. So, of course, by the end of this day, they end up saying, I love you to each other. Again, is this only day 2? Well, I'm not sure. Okay, so it's episode 2. It's not really sure how much time has passed, but even if it's only been 5 days. Don't tell me you love me after 5 days. Please, please, don't tell me you love me after 5 days. I've had someone tell me that they love me after 30 days. And obviously that was a red flag. We did go on to date for almost a year, but it wasn't a good time. So whenever I see shit like this, obviously it's a part of the show. I think they tell them hey, we really want you to say I love you before you leave the pods. So, there's that. But every time I just hear these conversations and just think about them in the real world, if this was a real convo that I had with someone that I've only known for a week, I'd be very turned off. But anyway, moving on, we see Aaliyah and Uche, and their last date was a little bit awkward because she opened up to him saying that she cheated. She tells him that she feels nervous about opening up to him in the future because she's not sure if she'll be judged, and she feels like Uche will be quick to judge her, and that makes her nervous. Uche reassures her. He's like, I said some things yesterday that I didn't mean. It was out of line. And he tells her the fact that you even told me about that in the first place, is good and shows that you're being honest, you're being open. So I'm sorry I didn't appreciate that in the moment. This eases Aaliyah's concerns, and she appreciates him being open and taking time to reflect and all that. But they end up making up, and that's where we leave things for now. The next day is Izzy and Stacy, and their connections are still just pretty light and playful. He tells Stacy that he's really attracted to her because she's the type of girl that knows exactly what she wants. And he mentions that he's had a good time getting to know her, but he's noticed that they haven't really gotten vulnerable. They haven't really talked about anything deep. She then tells him that she's not used to being open. She's not used to opening up so much on her dates. And this creates a little bit of tension in the air, and we can visibly see that Izzy is looking a little bit uncomfortable, maybe a little bit turned off. But yeah, that's how we see how their date went. Following this, we move on to Johnny and Chris, and their connection is going really good. Since Chris was opening up in the last date, this date seems to be pretty lighthearted. And he tells her that everything he's pictured in a wife that she has, and he's so into her. And Chris says, I love you to Johnny. We see in the date that Johnny's smiling and she's being receptive. I don't believe she says it back. We do know that Johnny is still really feeling into Izzy. Following this, we transition to Johnny's next date with Izzy, and they're opening up about their childhood. Izzy talks about how he grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, and one time he was invited to an Easter get together in school, and his dad pulled him aside and pretty much just reprimanded him, and Izzy got upset and left to a friend's house. At his friend's house, his friends tell him that's not really your dad, right? And then he talks about how he met his real dad and he discovered that he had much more siblings and stuff like that. And Johnny, again, is just really touched that he was able to be open and be vulnerable. So that has her feeling even closer to Izzy. He moves on to ask Johnny how she's feeling, where her head is at. And she tells him that Izzy is her number 2 and that Chris was her number 1. But after that day that she felt like Chris was giving more friend vibes. So, things are in the air right now. But it seems like Izzy is Johnny's number 1. Halfway through episode 2, and we have our first proposal. Can you guess who it is? It's Taylor and JP. Let's go. Our country bumpkin success story. Yeehaw. I'll brush by this. Yada, yada, yada. It's really sweet. He tells her how she's really sweet, how she's his sugar and all these things. She's like, you're my answered prayer. I can't believe we're here together. They say I love you. He proposes. She says I do. Yay. Happy times. So once again, we have a new day in the pods. We see Johnny and Chris's next date. And Chris is feeling super sure about Johnny. He's so excited. And when they come in, he asks how she's feeling. And she says that she's doing just okay. And he asks her why that is. And Johnny cuts right to the chase. And she tells him that she's feeling stronger with someone else, that someone else being Izzy. And he was feeling super confident that, Johnny was the one. Johnny tells him that she still thinks that he's a great person. He's emotional and he leaves, and he just talks about how he really wants to be loved for who he is, and he takes it hard. Right after, we see Johnny's next date with Izzy, and she tells Izzy that she cut things off with Chris and how she's feeling bad, and Izzy is just being supportive, telling her, you're here for you. I know that sucked, but you have to do what's right for you. And he's just being supportive, and she appreciates that. She talks about how her past relationships makes her think that other guys see her as a walking red flag. And she asks him if he has an addiction problem. He says no. So then she tells him that she lost her ex to an overdose 7 years prior. And she was married to her husband at the time. Also, I don't know if I mentioned this, but Johnny was engaged/married before. I don't know. They switch in between. Sometimes Izzy said that she was engaged. Sometimes she said she was married. So I'm not sure about that. But Izzy was also engaged. So that was something that they bonded with in one of their earlier dates. But Johnny was married to her ex-husband when her ex passed away. And she pretty much just tells Izzy that her ex-husband was a rebound from her ex-boyfriend that passed away. Understandably so. This makes Izzy a little uncomfortable because he's feeling like she's maybe not over her ex that passed away, and she's just, trying to fill that hole. So he pretty much asks her that, do you feel like you're ready to find a partner? Do you feel like you're ready to fill that hole? She then tells Izzy that she hasn't felt this way about anyone within the past 7 years. So she feels like this is the right thing to do for her, and she's ready. She's ready for the love that she deserves, all those things. Izzy is clearly uncomfortable. He's not really talking to Johnny, and she's just pretty much reassuring him I promise it's only you from here on out. And he tells her we have to call it a night. I'm just too overwhelmed. This catches Johnny a little bit off guard, but again, it's not like I'm a big fan of Izzy or anything. I just think he's being pretty realistic in the situation. If you're literally only going on dates all day and you feel strongly to two people and you find out something that could be a red flag in someone, yeah, you're gonna need the rest of the night to think it over. So I don't blame him. But they leave, and Johnny is of course upset. She goes back to the living quarters. She's crying to the other girls, and she's telling them, fuck, I just feel like I really let the one go because Chris seemed like he really cared, and now Izzy seems like he's unsure. So I don't know. I feel like I let the wrong one go. And it's okay, all right, girl. You took that chance. You're the one who said that Chris was the right one, but then you wanted to change your mind. So this is the risk that you were willing to take. So that's pretty much where episode 2 ends. We leave off with a cliffhanger of JP and Taylor getting ready to meet. It goes as you expect. They're both gushing. They're both pretty happy. It's actually pretty cute because JP is almost running to Taylor. She says sugar butt. He says sugar. All the feels. The only thing is Taylor says that in the pods, she felt like JP was a little bit more quiet. So she felt like she had to be, the one that was driving the conversations all the time. And she felt like it was still a little bit awkward meeting in person, but she's still being optimistic, which, I think it's fair. Meeting anyone for the first time is always a little bit awkward. So I can only imagine in this situation how awkward it must be. Next, we see Izzy and Stacy's next date. And Stacy is still feeling really excited, but Izzy's still feeling pretty unsure. Izzy asks Stacy if he feels like she can see them together. And she pretty much is yes, my heart skips a beat. And I just breathe heavy when I think about you, when I'm around you. I haven't felt this way in such a long time. She then asks what he's afraid of, and pretty much he talks about his insecurities again and how he's nervous that someone will leave him because they're not attracted or they're not happy with what he's providing, or stuff like that. And she pretty much agrees. She says she's worried about being abandoned. She doesn't want to feel like she's getting the rug pulled from underneath her. She's just scared because she wants to put herself out there, but she doesn't want to be hurt. Overall, the date ends with Stacy telling Izzy that he's her number one. Moving on to Uche and Aaliyah's next date. Their date, from what we see, is still pretty lighthearted. They talk about like weird stuff. Aaliyah's talking about how she likes to touch her weenus, how she likes to eat Splenda packets, how she likes to watch her partner take a shower and things like that. And Uche talks about how he has OCD, about how he's really particular about keeping things organized. And she mentions how that might clash because she's not like super organized, but it doesn't seem like anything that could be, like a deal breaker or anything. So their date ends off on pretty good terms. Next, we see Milton and Lydia, and they start off the date by giving each other gifts. Milton gave Lydia a yellow bee balloon, I think, because yellow is her favorite color, and she gives him a metamorphic rock, and they start bonding over that and shit. And after, being a little playful, they start to talk about something a little bit more serious. And Milton asks Lydia what her biggest accomplishment is. She talks about having 2 degrees. She has an undergrad in geology and a master's in business management, and how she was working during her grad degree and she still graduated with a 3.98. She then asks him what his biggest trauma is. Now I get it. The situation, they're trying to find, a partner, a wife. So you want to get down to the nitty gritty like right away. But that question's kind of crazy, because what if he never worked through his trauma? He talks about how in like 8th or 9th grade, he was playing basketball and then started to have some back pain after. And then at a doctor's appointment, they discovered that he had scoliosis. And since there was such a bend in his spine, it started to cause organ damage. And he needed to have surgery within like the next 6 months. This was obviously, pretty traumatizing and a lot for him to take on. And he says that he's grateful for life, but he's just always been worried that, what if my back fucks up for good and I'm paralyzed? Who's going to love me for that? And pretty much Lydia is just like super reassuring, like, I'll be there to support you. I'll be there to take care of you, and I'm going to love you forever. And he's just like, I just want to let you know, like, I'm not going to live that long. And she's like, Milton, like, don't say that. And I get where she's coming from, but also Milton, I feel you, my guy. I relate. As someone with a chronic pain disease, like growing up when I was younger, I used to kind of say that a lot. Like in middle school and high school, like I used to tell people like, yeah, like I'm not going to live that long. Because that's kind of what I heard growing up. Not a lot. But I just remember this one time, I think I was like at a doctor's appointment. I don't know. I heard someone say like, oh, people with, my disease only live up to like 50 years old. And I was like 7. So when I heard that, to me, I'm like, 50? That's not that old. And then I just started crying. And that has kind of always stuck with me ever since. But technology and science, thankfully, has, advanced since then. So my life expectancy is still not 50. It's like 60 now, but that's better. But anyway, sorry for that long tangent. He's just telling her like, I'm not sure how long I'm going to live. She's like, don't think about that, because I just want to spend all the time I can with you. And that makes Milton, a little bit reassured, and their date ends off on a good note. Moving on to Johnny and Izzy. And Johnny's feeling pretty good. She asks Izzy how he's feeling. He pretty much tells her like, okay, I'm going to tell you the differences between you and Stacy. He tells Johnny that he really appreciates how they have always been so deep and vulnerable from the start. And he hasn't gotten that with Stacy, but he just feels like she knows him really well. And she says that she felt the same way with Chris, how she just knew that he was the safe, secure choice. And she could just picture exactly how their life would be. But with Izzy, I don't know, there was just something a little bit more. And with Izzy, she feels like she can have this love that's worthwhile and things like that. Izzy takes a minute. He takes all these things that she's saying into consideration whenever he's thinking about it. But he ultimately tells her, if I'm going to commit, it just has to make sense. And I just feel stronger with my other connection. She accepts it. She's disappointed. She leaves. She's crying in the pods in like their living quarters. And she's talking to the other girls, and she's like, if he thinks that Stacy is gonna be the girl for him, like they're gonna have a lot of other problems like to be ready for, which is like, girl, again, like not cute. It's not looking good for you, Johnny. I'm sorry, girl. And then the girls are like, so have you thought about Chris? What? I thought you just told Izzy that you're gonna be thinking about him forever, but then you're like, oh, Chris, maybe this could work out. To be fair, it was the other girls who were like, oh, you could still give Chris a chance, but I think she's still kind of shitty for considering that. Following this, we transition straight to Izzy's next date with Stacy. And when he walks in the door, she's like, how you feeling? And he's like, I'm feeling pretty good, but oh my God, the drama, girl. He pretty much tells her how he cut off things with Johnny. And she's like, I don't know nothing about that. I don't want no parts. That's for Johnny to deal with. And he's like, agreed. This is about us. Izzy's feeling pretty good at this point. He tells Stacy that he feels like he's falling in love all over again, and how he just feels like, you know, this is like the best choice. He feels like he's making a good choice. He asks her where she's at with saying the L word, meaning I love you. And she says that it's on her mind. This seems to catch Izzy a little bit off guard. She's like, I haven't said that word in a really long time, to be honest. It's been like 4 years since I've even called anyone my boyfriend. And I've dated in between that time, but, you know, I haven't gotten close to saying I love you to anyone, which I think is so valid. And I also think like there's too much pressure with them saying I love you, because like clearly if you're hanging out with someone for a week straight, you're going to end up feeling some type of feelings for them. Not saying like, oh, you're going to fall in love or whatever in 7 days, but you can definitely start to grow some feelings like, oh yeah, I really care about this person. Right. And I think that's what's happening for the most part for these people. It's like they're growing an attachment and they care about the other person, and maybe they're growing love for the person, but to say that they're in love with them is pretty wild, pretty bizarre. So ultimately this leaves Izzy feeling confused because he just ended things with Johnny. He's like, oh no, is this a red flag? He's feeling a little bit all over the place. Following this, we see Chris and Johnny. Yeah, Chris is still there. We actually see Chris hanging out in the men's living quarters, and he's talking to Uche, JP, and Izzy. And they're like, dude, you're still here? He's like, yeah, I'm still fighting. Like, you know, Izzy wants to talk. I'm not sure, whatever. It's a little bit awkward, but he leaves to the date. And when he comes in, pretty much Johnny's just telling him, you know, Izzy broke up with me. And from there, I was just feeling pretty regretful. I heard that when I broke things off with you, that you got pretty emotional. And that made me think like, fuck, maybe I let go of the one that really cares. So long story short, she just pretty much convinces Chris, like, it was you all along and I shouldn't have let you go. Johnny tells Chris that she felt like she was repeating a pattern with Izzy, and she felt like she always goes for guys that are emotionally unavailable. I didn't mention this, but before Izzy broke up with Johnny told Izzy, with Chris, I felt like I was following a pattern. I felt like he was pretty safe, whatever, but with you, it feels different. So obviously this is pretty contradicting, but Chris doesn't know that. She tells him that she's never had a serious relationship and she's ready for something more secure. And he's like, how do you know? She's like, it's been time. I know I deserve the love that I need, whatever. And at the end, Chris is like, you know, I do still care about you, so I do want to give this a shot. Chris comes back to the men's living quarters and talks to Izzy. He's like, yeah, Johnny was just telling me how she felt like she was repeating a pattern with you. And he's like, oh, really? Because she said the same thing about you, bro. And he's like, what the fuck? So Izzy's telling her like, oh yeah, with Chris, she felt like she was always going for like the safe, secure option. And he's like, oh, she said with you, she feels like she's like always picking the wrong person. So obviously the math ain't mathin'. And this leaves Chris even more confused and struggling. So I feel bad for the guy. The next scene, we see Uche and Milton have a little short conversation. They just ask like, oh, how are things going with Lydia? He says things are going good, but he doesn't really open up much. So he asks Milton, how are you feeling about marriage? He's like, I feel good. Like, he doesn't really say much, but he's like, how are you feeling about Lydia? Just trying to get him to open up a little bit more. And Milton is being hesitant. He's refusing. He's like, I really don't want to open up about this. I'd rather not talk about it. And they drop it. Episode 3 ends with Uche and Aaliyah's date. She tells Uche that she really feels, connected with Uche, but she's just really nervous because she doesn't want to be hurt. But she knows that ultimately Uche will be honest with her no matter what. And of course, Uche's like, speaking about truth and honesty. So he tells Aaliyah that on the first day of the pods, he meets someone. And it ends up being someone that he knows and someone that he dated in the past. That person is Lydia. And that's where episode 3 ends. Pretty crazy. I haven't really talked about it much, but Lydia and Aaliyah have been getting pretty close in the pods. So this is clearly hitting Aaliyah in a different way. Episode 4, we jump right back into Uche and Aaliyah's date, and they show us a clip of Lydia and Uche meeting on the first day in the pods. Uche walks in, he introduces himself, and Lydia immediately is like, fuck. He's like, that's not what I was expecting. Like, do I know you? And she's like, this is your full name. You're a lawyer. You have your own business. And he's like, do I know you? And she's like, yeah, you know me outside the pods. And he's like, can you tell me who you are? She's like, I'll give you a hint. I love Kobe. And he's like, Lydia? She's like, yes. Oh my God. They like laugh about it a little bit. They're like, this is weird. Like, we weren't expecting it, whatever. So then she's like, is this a sign? Does this mean that we should just like start over? And he's like, since we already dated and we already know what each other look like, I think that would kind of defeat the purpose of the experiment. And she's like, okay, like, you're right. So they kind of just agree from there to go their separate ways. This is a lot for Aaliyah because, as I mentioned, Lydia is her good friend. And she talks about, oh my God, I didn't know. Like, Lydia is like a sister to me. She's really like the closest person to me in the living quarters because, the girls can be so catty here, but Lydia, she just hugs me like my own sister, and I want her to be the aunt to my kids, all this stuff, right? She then asked him if he feels like he has like any regrets or anything like that for Lydia. And he's like, no, that's in the past, like that's over with. And he ultimately let Lydia go because he felt like he couldn't give her the love that she deserved. And he was saying she deserves a person that's going to give her everything, which he's totally right. He then asks how she feels about Milton. Aaliyah tells him that she's really excited and she wants to marry him. And this leaves Uche feeling a little concerned. He's like, don't tell her I told you this, but I was just talking to Milton and he does not seem ready. And I just don't want her to be hurt, whatever. So this is a lot for Aaliyah to take in. She's like, I just need to talk to Lydia because, we just need to like have that talk before we can get past this. He's like, okay. After their conversation, we move on to the second proposal, which is Izzy and Stacy. Not really much to talk about here. It goes as planned. They both come in, they're cute, gushing over each other. He proposes, she says yes, blah, 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 blah. So Stacy comes back in the women's quarters and she's like, oh my God, like I'm a fiance, whatever. She's like excited. The girls are like, yay and stuff. And she's just like, she takes a moment, she starts crying. She's like, it just feels good to be like happy and that I don't have to like hold back. And we see Johnny just like sitting there like in the kitchen or whatever. She's just like looking over and she says congrats to Stacy, which is like, girl, it's still not looking good for you, boo. Like it's just like not a good look for Johnny at all, unfortunately. From here, we transition to Chris and Johnny's proposal. Chris kind of gives Johnny the floor to talk first, and she says how she's feeling nervous, but she just feels really sure about Chris this time. She apologizes for, taking him for granted and letting him go. He accepts her apology. And the way he's talking is like he's telling her that he wants Johnny, but he still kind of sounds unsure. He says, I came here to find my wife, and at one point I thought I did. I've always had a hard time picking the right woman. I've always had to be the one to give my all. I need to be selfish and choose the person that always chooses me. Meaning that he's going to choose himself and not propose to Johnny. Obviously, she's defeated and she's like, okay, I understand. I respect your decision. I wish you the best. And that's where things end with Johnny and Chris. I cannot tell you how glad I am that Chris did not propose. Like, oh my God, that's like, no. He just would have been setting himself up for failure. And I'm glad he was able to recognize that like it most likely would have been a shit show if he decided to stay with Johnny. But Johnny was not ready either. Oh my God, especially if she would have got proposed to. And then after they propose, all the couples live in like the same apartment complex. So they all meet the person that like they used to talk to. And if Johnny, I'm just so convinced that if Johnny was able to meet Izzy, she was going to be a homewrecker. She was going to try and break up him and Stacey. So glad to see that she made it out of there. The next scene, we see Aaliyah and Lydia getting ready to have their conversation in the women's living quarters. And we just see them hugging each other. And Aaliyah tells her, I know. Lydia's like, you know? She's like, yeah, he told me. And then Lydia's just crying. She's sobbing. She's like, I was so scared for you to know. I'm sorry. She's like, remember when I told you I see myself in you? Lydia tells Aaliyah how she was at a really, really low point in her life when she met Uche. And she overall just felt like she was just throwing everything onto him and he wasn't able to, you know, support her in the way that she needed. She then tells Aaliyah about, you know, their first interaction in the pods. And she tells Aaliyah that Uche suggested starting over from ground zero and that it was Lydia's idea to go separate ways because they already met. When it was actually the other way around. Lydia was the one who was like, oh, maybe we should start over. And Uche's like, we already know each other. So, that's already making Aaliyah feel a little bit unsure about Uche, which isn't fair in my eyes. But anyway, Lydia's telling Aaliyah that she doesn't have any feelings for Uche and that from now on, she'll only look at Uche as Aaliyah's husband. But then immediately she starts telling Aaliyah like all these things about Uche. She's like, oh, do you know about his dog Kobe? Do you know about his blue Tesla? Like all these things. And Aaliyah's just like, oh, okay, I'd rather not know. Like I want things to like still be a surprise. But I don't know. Lydia is just like, oh my God, like, girl, let me just tell you everything about my ex and your new future husband. I think that's weird. So long story short, Aaliyah just gets annoyed because Lydia is just like telling her all these things about Uche. And now she doesn't know how to feel because she's like, what if she still has feelings for him and vice versa? And she doesn't want to feel like she has to be like looking over her back and whatever because she still wants to be friends with Lydia and pursue Uche, which, girl, you got to do one or the other. Which, honestly, if you're here for the show, I think you should drop Lydia. Even though that sucks. Lydia is such a sweet person and I think she's really genuine. She's really caring and I think her and Aaliyah like would be really good friends. But if you're here to find a man and, you know, that just happened to be the circumstance, then I think you should let Lydia go. So from here, Aaliyah talks to Uche once more and she tells him if there's no trust, then there's no marriage. So she just asks him again, like, are there any feelings there? And he's like, no, if I wanted Lydia, I would still be with Lydia. And she tells him, you know, I'm having a hard time over here because I just don't know what's true or not. And he kind of is like being passive. He's like, I'm experiencing it too. If anything, I'm going through it, if not more. And she's like, no, you're not, because I'm over here sitting with your ex who you fucked 3 months ago. Ooh, I didn't mention this, but in their conversation, Lydia does open up to Aaliyah and tell her that they had sex 3 months prior. I guess they were like still dating in between that time and they hooked up. And then from there, they just decided to go their separate ways. But Aaliyah didn't know this. This came from Lydia. So Uche tells her like, yes, we tried to reconnect. And ultimately, I just felt like it wasn't going to work. So we went our separate ways. But there's nothing. I have no feelings for Lydia. Like, it's only about you. Aaliyah's upset, but she does understand. And she's like, you know, it's going to take some time. I don't know how we're going to do it, but, you know, we're going to make this through. So their date ends off a little bit better, a little bit more hopeful. Following this, we see Lydia and Milton's next date. And Lydia opens up and she tells Milton how she knows Uche. And this rubs Milton the wrong way. He's like, I wish I would have known about this all along. He's actually like being a little bit indifferent. I don't know. She's like opening up to him and he's not really talking. She's like, Milton, like, you're pretty quiet over there. Like, are you okay? He's like, yeah, I guess. Like, dude, what? I hated his reaction throughout this whole conversation because, like, to me, it just really proved that, like, he's not ready to have these deep, serious conversations, like, especially not in a marriage. Like, So yeah, I'm not sure how I'm feeling about Milton after this one. Lydia is just really telling Milton how much she's falling in love with him and how it's only him, and she was nervous to tell him because she didn't want to lose him. She didn't want him to think anything differently of him, whatever. He ends up telling Lydia that throughout his time in the pods, he realized that there's still a lot of self-reflection and a lot of self-growth that he needs to undergo, which to me kind of sounds like he was trying to break things off with Lydia. But she's just like, oh my God, like, I'm 30 years old. I'm still going through a lot of self-growth. Like, you discovering that at 24 is huge. It's so big, which is like, I don't know. I think self-growth, self-discovery is an everlasting journey. So, okay, sure that he realized that, but I don't know. Maybe he just needs time on his own, and maybe they could date sometime later in the future. But like, I don't know. This guy isn't ready to be married in like the next 6 weeks. Overall, Lydia kind of like gets his spirits back up. I don't know. She's like, if you have any doubts, ex Uche. And he's just like, oh, that was a bad joke, like wrong timing. She's like, was that a bad joke? I'm perfect though. You want me, I'm perfect for you. He's just sitting there like a little unsure. So yeah, I don't know. Kind of feels like Milton's being bullied into this relationship. Maybe bullied isn't the right word. He's just being really like swayed. I don't know. I think he needs to be a little bit more honest with himself. The next scene is Stacy and Izzy's proposal. No, not proposal, reveal. And again, I'm going to breeze by this as well because their interaction is pretty cute. They just keep complimenting each other. He says like, you know, I was nervous because of my bald head, and he didn't tell her that he was bald, and she's like, I don't care. He even makes a dumb joke. She's like, I washed my hair for you. He's like, me too. You know, they're having a good time. Things are looking good for them. Our next proposal is Milton and Lydia. Milton opens up to Lydia and he tells her that he couldn't stop thinking about her, and that he was just thinking about the sacrifices that you'll need to make in a marriage. He's like, you know, I really had to think, like, I can't just stay at my friend's house till 3 a.m. playing Wii anymore. Wii, my guy? I'm not even judging. Like, honestly, I wish I still had my Wii. I fucking miss Guitar Hero. But yeah, I don't know. I don't have high hopes for either of them. I'm so sorry. Long story short, Lydia tells him how she just wants him, and she feels like their life will just always be fun. They'll just always be laughing, yada, yada, yada. And pretty much Milton is just still telling Lydia how unsure he is. Like, he keeps just saying like, I don't know, I'm so nervous, which, girl, that is a walking red flag. Please just walk away. But she doesn't. Milton ends up proposing. He's like, I don't know how to do this. He says, will you be my Puerto Rican wife? Of course she says, I'll be your Puerto Rican wife. I don't know. Milton is still a little bit suspect to me because it seems like he doesn't really know what he wants in a marriage, and she seems like she's just ready for anyone to take her at this point, which both seem like a recipe for disaster. So we'll see how that plays out. And ending episode 4, we have our final proposal, Uche and Aaliyah. So in the talking head, we see Uche talking about how Aaliyah is his girl, she's the one for him, and how he's just excited to leave the pause with her and finally meet her. He walks in the room, he says hello, and doesn't receive an answer. And he's kind of just sitting a little bit. So of course the anticipation is building. Shortly after, we hear a producer or some shit say, oh, hey, Uche, Aaliyah has decided not to continue with the experiment anymore. Of course, Uche is hurt. Now, of course, this is where episode 4 ends, so it's a cliffhanger. I feel like Aaliyah walked away because it was just too much for her, and honestly, I don't blame her. She felt really connected to Lydia and felt like they could be good friends, but obviously she felt really connected to Uche too, who she was looking to have, you know, a lifelong partnership with. And I can understand how that decision could be a little too much. If she felt like she couldn't choose between either of them, she had to let them both go, which I think is totally fair. But if she walked away because she felt like she would rather be friends with Aaliyah rather than Uche, then I guess, I don't know. Like, it seems like it would be the better choice to pick a friend over a man, but like a friend, I feel like a friend breakup is harder to deal with. I don't know, but That's where things leave off with episode 4. And that is where I'll end today's video. If you guys enjoyed this video, please make sure to give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm trying to reach my next goal of 500 subscribers, so I would really appreciate it if you could help me reach that goal. And if you're interested in any of my other vlogs, you can check them out too. But that's all I have for you today, and thanks for watching. Bye.